The world of theater is full of stars. But just like in the night sky, sometimes we don't see them all. Some are in the wings, some are maybe up over us in the catwalk. Hopefully they're not under the stage, but you never know. In this series, we are going to meet those hidden stars of the theater, hear their stories, and be inspired by them. So join me on this journey here in my state-of-the-art production studio in my backyard as we meet the hidden stars of theater. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Hidden Stars of Theater. As always, it is so great to have you here in my camper, in my backyard in southeastern Oklahoma. Absolutely love having you as my guest, and love having great guests like the one we have today, who is from Michigan, and so is our featured school of the day, Dowagiac High School from Dowagiac, Michigan, under Coach Tammy Mamet. So thank you guys for hosting. We're going to look at some of your show shots here in just a second. Excited to see those and how your season was. But super duper, if you guys will remember, Tim Schmidt is a name you've heard before, right? From Mike Ruckstadt. And we're excited to hear all Tim's journey and his story of how he came from little Tim to where he is today. But first, we want to look at those show shots, Dowagiac, because you guys are awesome. You're stars as well. So before we get to our hidden star today, let's look at those, all right? Let's roll those show shots. All right. Hey, thank you, Tammy Mamet, for sending in those show shots. Looks like you guys had a good season before it all ended here from Dowagiac, Michigan. What an incredible name. That's Dowagiac. It sounds like a fun place to be from. Maybe I'll visit there someday. Who knows? Maybe not, but maybe so. We'll see. But speaking of Michigan, we've got somebody from there today, which is kind of cool that you guys are our feature school of the day. And that is Mr. Tim Schmidt. Now, if you've heard that name before, it's because you've heard about him. He is the man, the myth, the legend that Mr. Mike Ruckstadt in episode 3 kind of stalked, I think is probably the best word, Tim. Would you agree?
I think stalking is the right word. Yeah, it's totally.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for not getting a restraining order and for being patient with him and, being his Yoda, the Yoda to his Luke, right, and helping him out and achieve, obviously, some cool stuff. But you, sir, have done some cool things as well. And you are our star for the day. Absolutely. And you really are a star, man. I've been just gotten to learn some really cool things about you over the last couple days and getting to know you. And I'm excited to share that with everybody that's here today. And they're going to just love it because you are they're going to learn you're a natural teacher, right? And we know that a little bit just from other people we've spoken with who told us about you. And so, man, it's an honor to have you. It is an honor to have you here in my trailer, in my backyard.
I love
hanging out, man. And it's a good day. I even have my Diet Pepsi today.
Nice.
That wasn't even like a planned product placement.
Is that 64 ounces or 32?
It's 44.
44. All right.
44. But the place I get it does have the 64. That's serious. It's called the Queen Bee.
Yeah.
So, but we're not here to talk about me or about Pepsi products. We're here to talk about you, sir. And so we, as always, we want to get to know you. We want to hear your story. Because as I love to say every time, and I'll never apologize for it because it's so true, it is the things that you have gone through that have molded you into who you are. Mm-hmm. And that is an awesome thing. And so we want to know what that is because we are all on a journey. And maybe you've gone through some things that'll help us along ours. And whether we are looking at becoming a professional audio technician in the world of live theatre, or we're running sound for our local community theater, or none of that.
Right.
It's just some great stuff that you have been through and that you can share with us. So without further ado, tell us, what is it that has created the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Tim Schmidt? Start from the very beginning and bring us all the way to now.
Well, I think the important thing is like when I started, I didn't know any of this was even a career path or even an option as a job or anything like that, really, until high school. I didn't really have any. I started in band, in choir, with my band and choir teachers, sort of teaching me music and music theory and all that stuff. And then when I got into high school, I think that was the first time anyone really said to me, "Hey, we need somebody to do this play." And I was like, "Okay, I want to hang out with my friends more." And I think high school is kind of where you start making your own choices as far as, not having to rely on your parents so much, and crafting what you want to be, and figuring out what you want to do. And I always knew music was an important thing. My mom had a band when she was she was pregnant with me, and she was singing in the band with her family and stuff like that with my uncles. And so music's always been in my ears, so
even as they formed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I knew music was going to be something I wanted to do. And I thought maybe teaching music would be an appropriate thing. And but then, like, I showed up to this play and started helping out, and you get bit by the theater bug, and it's a real thing,
Absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
I just never stopped. It all through high school, I kind of went where my friends went and started doing plays, and I was still in band and still in choir and still doing all that stuff. And I just decided at one point I was just going to do as much of it as I possibly could, and as far as like, just trying to do everything, absorb it all, take a music theory class, all these things, learn about the craft and how it was developed. And then sometime in high school, my mom went with her friend to go see Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in Chicago. While that was sitting there, it was with Donny Osmond.
Oh, wow.
And he
Cool.
came home just raving about it. Just like, oh my God.
And kids out there, Google Donny Osmond if you don't know who he is.
Oh, yeah.
He was on The Masked Singer
Masked
recently.
Singer. I was just going to say that. And I knew that voice. We had that like
we did too.
I was like, man,
absolutely. That was one of the easy ones.
Yeah. So that's always been a thing. And she came home, it's raving about it, and was like, you would love it. You have to see this. And eventually I went and saw it, but I started really going to see professional shows with my friend Kevin. And his family were really into theater, and they had, so we went and saw it. The first show I ever saw professionally was called Blood Brothers, which is a great show if you've never seen it or heard it. And then we saw Tommy, we saw Jesus Christ Superstar, with Ted Neely and Carl Anderson, I saw shows I didn't necessarily like. I was starting to get into making decisions on my own. Like we saw Carousel, and I knew that wasn't for me. Things like that.
You were more into the rock opera.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's that sound where you're like, man, I guess musical theater kind of has that stigma of being like kind of classical or hokey, right, or things like that. But now, and especially nowadays, the kids who are growing up with it are getting so much more diversity with the shows that are being written. And the shows are, the echelon of writing and material that's out there is just so good and so clean, and everything is there. If you want it, it's there. And back when we were starting, we only had like Oklahoma and Sound of Music, and I grew up on those movies, but never. I don't know why it never really connected with me that it would be on the stage. That's something I could see.
Right.
So we kept going to see shows, and then I went with them to New York. My first New York trip was with my friend Kevin, and we saw Les Mis, and we saw Phantom, the classics that you have to see. Absolutely. And we saw this play called Picasso at the La Pana Gilles. It's written by Steve Martin. And it was just a play. It had a couple of like not no names, but it had a couple of stars in it, and And we went and saw it, and it was hilarious. And I just at some point during that trip, I thought, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Music, teaching music, it would be great, but I think I want to do this. And then I sort of just again, like every little thing that could happen, we tried to delve into it as much as possible. And when opportunities weren't there for us, we created them. It was, we even like kind of made our own little theater group in Greenville, Michigan, and did shows because there weren't as many opportunities for us. And it sort of we were sort of self-taught almost. We were using the people around us as mentors and things like that. But we were really learning by doing, I guess is what you'd say.
Yeah. On the job training.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so then by the time we got to the end of high school, I thought, well, okay, now what do I do? And a lot of my theater friends were going to Western Michigan University. And so I was like, well, I'll go, let's go there. That seems like a good place. So I went to a campus visit and I saw a show they were doing. And the show that I saw was Secret Garden. And
oh, wow.
it was the closest thing I'd seen to the shows I was seeing in New York and in Grand Rapids at DeVos at the Roadhouse where the touring shows were coming in. And, we do our little community theater shows and those are fun. And we do our self-produced things and those were fun. But that was like, that looks real,
Right.
Like, I think what professional theater should look like. So I was hooked and I was like, this is where I want to go. Like I had my interview and stuff with them and I had to like I made my own little light plots and like brought something from my portfolio and met the staff there and they accepted me so I went to Western Michigan University and I was a tech and design major. And then I didn't really want to do, I knew I didn't want to do performance because there's something about, I had performed before, but I think my passion really kind of was lying. My passion was lying. I don't know how to say that. My passion was in tech. So I think that for me, I wanted to be, tech is performing as much as it on stage anyways,
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think, I don't know, it just got me, I was more of I liked the gear. I liked playing with the lights and playing with the soundboard and stuff like that. And I thought that was the best use of my skills. Okay. I had a lot of music knowledge and wanted to enhance that. So I thought, well, maybe sound is the right thing for me to do. We had our little meeting at the beginning of the year, my freshman year, and they were like, okay, who's interested in scenic? Who wants to do props? Who wants to? And I was like, who wants to do sound? And I raised my hand, and I was the only person in the room with my hand up. So I was like, and the professor looked at me and he was like, "You're my guy." It's like, cool.
Congratulations.
So his name was Matt Knutson, and he, from that moment on, he literally gave me every opportunity they had. I mean, he gave me keys to the building and made me the systems assistant. So I was doing maintenance on the sound on stuff and like kind of overseeing lighting calls, late night lighting calls. And this is as a freshman and sophomore, really.
Wow.
He taught me computer sound effects editing and how to build sound effects and things like that on a program called Sound Edit 16, which was the old Mac program. And how to cut music together if you're, to make music cues and things like that. And I just really kind of fell in love with the whole aspect of sound design and building sound and sort of not necessarily writing music, but using other people's music to get emotion across, things like that. And the connection that music can have to the piece, can be anybody's influence. I mean, you put 100 sound guys in the room and they'll probably all pick something different, but
absolutely. It's like any artist, right? I mean, you're sculpting. You're sculpting,
exactly.
Or maybe painting is a better analogy for that because you're choosing different pigments, different colors, different warmths, and it's all about using those things to evoke from the audience
exactly
the right emotions, and that goes right along with it. That's cool.
I'd spent a lot of time in high school sort of listening to movie scores. I kind of got, starting, obviously Star Wars was such a big thing, for me growing up, and, but the score to Superman and basically and John Williams in general. But, you have all these other great composers like Alan Silvestri and, Hans Zimmer and all these guys that are writing these beautiful scores. And then Howard Shore comes out with the Lord of the Rings, and it was just like you try, but then you try and like delve in, deep dive into like the obscure things and stuff that people might not know. Like you don't want somebody to go, that's Superman, I can't use that for a play, but I could maybe use something, that John Williams wrote, that could be used for this or something like that. And I kind of learned that from one of the professors there. His name was Karsten, and he was David Karsten, and he came in with this like stack of cassette tapes and was like, here's all my sound cues my music cues for the show. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I was like, can you just tell me what he didn't want anyone to know what the music was because of that. You don't want people to know what it is going in because they'll lose the connection. So I kind of learned from him, and he was like, kind of taught me that you want to find music that is connected to the piece, but not, it's too common. And you don't want to tell anybody ever what it is. If anyone asks you, what's that music from? You're like, I don't know, I found it somewhere. So these things in college that I was like learning about, and I worked with, so I was maintaining systems and, hanging out with my friends there. And the other girl who was the systems assistant with me was Stacy Thomas, and she's now Stacy Kearney, and she lives in Kansas City. She's awesome. But so we were like working together to do those things, and it was, again, Matt was just like pushing us to do whatever we were sound editing. And then we get to we did Amadeus, and we had to like built this huge sound palette for Amadeus, which included way more music than the script called for, but it just seemed necessary, it was Stacy's sound design, and I was going to be her board op, but we kind of worked together on it, and we just kind of decided that it needed more, and then we put so much music in it, we had to put body mics on the actors because you could,
yeah,
it was like
not a musical for those who don't know.
but we had so much, it was so much underscoring, it was necessary. And then Matt kind of pushed me to, mix the musical that next year. We did Cabaret. And so I was miking, instruments and learning how to, mix some live, and then using the body mics to enhance, the natural sound of the room. We had the Shaw Theater at Western is, I think it's like maybe 1,200 seats, but it's one big continental seating. There was no balcony or anything like that. So it was a small room, but but we moved the soundboard down to a mixed position and, all this stuff. And he kind of just showed me like what was important about that kind of stuff. And then through that, I got my first real professional job, which we didn't talk about yesterday, was at the Wagon Wheel Theater in Warsaw, Indiana.
The Wagon Wheel Theater.
The Wagon Wheel Theater in Warsaw, Indiana.
Awesome.
It was like this little pavilion attached to a Ramada Inn, and it was in the round, hence Wagon Wheel.
Yeah.
And I did 7 shows there in 17 weeks. It was a true summer stock theater, and they pulled a lot of their actors from Western as well. So they would come up and interview us, and then audition all the actors, and we did just a ton of shows there over a short period of time. There's 5 musicals and 2 plays. And then I started like kind of getting into practical sound effects because we did Little Shop of Horrors, and, and I wanted to make all the phones ring like for callback in the morning, and then there was like the play was all about this doorbell. And I didn't want to have like 100 sound cues. So I just made a practical doorbell that they could ring. But it was interesting because the set was kind of cut in half. So where the doorbell would exist, there was nothing there. It was a ceiling and a floor. So I had to build like a little foot switch into the floor that the actor could sort of step on as they were miming pushing the button, so you could still have a practical doorbell. So it was little fun things like that. You just kind of, this Indiana Jones style of making it up as you go along sort of thing. Like, what works? How do I do this?
Creative problem solving.
Yeah. And somebody asks you, to do something, and you're like, sure, I think I could probably figure that out. Try not to say no right away.
Yep.
And if you can give it a second to kind of ruminate, most of the time you'll figure out something.
Yeah, I know when I'm doing scenic design, that's what I always, a lot of times I'll meet with a director and I'll ask them, what do you want? Well, I'd like this, but you probably can't do that. And no, let me tell you what I can't do.
Exactly. I've had other situations where somebody else in the room has answered that question for me, and they're like I had to build a live radio for something, but it had to play things that we wanted it to play, and she was like, "Can you do that?" And somebody else in the room was like, "That's not possible." And I was like,
yeah, it is.
Hold on. I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say yes, but I will work on it and try and figure something out. And we actually made it happen.
Absolutely.
And then that person comes back to you and goes, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry about that. That was really cool that you did that." And so it's kind of cool that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so we finished out the wagon wheel season, which was brutal because it's summer stock. I don't know if people know about summer stock, but you're not just, I didn't just go as the sound guy. I was like also a carpenter's assistant. So I was in the shop from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock. And then at 5, you have to go get dinner because you have to be back at the theater at 6 to do the show at 7:30. Then you do the show. And then sometimes if we were behind in the shop, we'd have to go back to the shop for a night session and then do it all over the next day. And you're doing that for 17 weeks, and they had these old style microphones that were like plastic case. They're called Vegas. And
absolutely, yep.
If anyone's ever worked with Vegas,
yeah,
because they were plastic, and the place where the connector went in would sort of flex, which meant that the prongs that went into the circuit board would break, and then you'd get this like loud popping sound. And a lot of times nowadays you'll see that in the connector, anyway. So I would have to have like a soldering iron hot, ready to go, so that intermission I could grab somebody's mic, crack it open, resolder it back together, because they didn't have spares. And it was always like in Little Shop of Horrors, it was always like one of the doo-wop girls or, whatever. And we just had to kind of, again, guerrilla style theater, make sure everything worked. So
do what you got to do.
So there was a lot of troubleshooting and learning how to manage that, and went back to Western for a semester, and then kind of ran out of money, and wasn't able to complete my degree. So I went home and I called the dark times where I didn't really do theater much for like a couple of years. I got like a job working at Blockbuster, kind of kept in my interests were movies and stuff like that and music. I worked at Blockbuster for a little while. I worked at Media Play, which doesn't exist anymore either. But, while I was doing that, a friend of mine had called me and said, "Hey, are you interested in coming down and helping? I know that you like to do sound and have done it. Grand Rapids Civic Theater is looking for somebody to help with their sound for their shows." And I was kind of hem-hawing about it a little bit, and I eventually, of course, said yes, and went down there, and I met Penny Nodder, who was the artistic director at the time, and she said to me, she said, "We just want our shows to sound like they do at DeVos Hall or on Broadway." They weren't using a lot of microphones at the time, and the theater's an old majestic theater, like a legitimate majestic theater with a stage, and it has that kind of bowl,
very ornate.
Yeah, exactly.
Theater, yeah.
And the acoustical properties of the room were very, akin to old timey shows, because you didn't need mics. The acoustics were doing the work and things like that.
Right.
But they were just getting into older audiences maybe, or just wanting to update. And so I met Randy Hoekstra and Randy DeBoer and Randy Hoekstra's son, Kevin Hoekstra. And we all started kind of working on like how to build the sound of the room. And I'm going to sneeze. At some point, like we got a hold of the local sound company here, Corporate Sound, and those guys worked with us and kind of showed us like how to hang speakers for the room, and they let us borrow. We had an old 24 channel Rams a soundboard, which we did our first show on, and then after that, they sort of helped us with gear. We were able to get a little bit of money, and we put a mix position in so that we could have a permanent place to be. And then we just started going from there. We were loading in and loading out, and kind of got tired of that, and decided.
Did Kevin or either of the Randys, did they have any experience in sound before, or was it kind of a new thing?
I don't think professionally, but they had been doing theater for a lot longer than I had, and I think, it was sort of like where I was coming from, where they were sort of creating it as it went along, and they had better connections and more people involved. So they were ahead of me in that respect, but we were sort of working all together. I mean, I never felt like I was on the coattails watching, just doing whatever they asked me to do. It was always a very collaborative effort.
Nice.
And the guys from corporate sound would come in and be like, yeah, try this, these are the things you could be doing. And then they just started seeing us really being successful, and that's where you start learning to mix. You're like, okay, I want it to sound good. How do I make that happen? Obviously, the fewest mics on, the better. And then, I'll put those two people up because they're singing, and now they're getting close together. Maybe I gotta, you decide to figure out which one to want to take out or things like that. And you're sort of just like using your ears. I mean, as a sound person, your ears are everything.
Right.
And it's you can run the gear or set the stuff up or, make the decisions all you want. But if you can't use these to make the proper choices, then it's all for naught, really.
Yeah. And I know, Mike talked about this, and he mentioned the fact that you guys were very much in your background in music.
Yeah.
Being a huge part of that, knowing what things should sound like.
Yeah.
Which is massive.
And I think that even knowing what they should sound like, but having an opinion of what you want it to sound like is good as well.
Absolutely.
I want to hear that person sing that lyric. How come I can't hear the violin in that section? Little things like that where knowing the music to know what it should sound like, and then having the opinion to make it so. It's
really sculpt it. And
exactly.
Bring the audience with you in that.
Right. So then kind of through that, we worked on a lot of shows that first year that I was there. And then the guys from corporate started giving me gigs for their theater work, because they really were rock and roll guys, and corporate gigs, things like that. But they kept getting calls for theater things and didn't really have a guy. And they kept calling me going, hey, are you available to do this? And always say yes, And so they would send me with a truck full of gear, and I would go set some stuff up and do sound for these shows. And then one of the guys at corporate worked at Cherry County Playhouse in Muskegon, and they were like a summer stock kind of theater. They're no longer there anymore. But they were doing 4 shows, and they were kind of that level of summer stock where they would call in celebrities who were on sitcoms in the 80s and things like that. So we had Sandy Duncan and Peter Scolari, who was on Bosom Buddies, and Eddie Mecca from Happy Days, and John Davidson from Hollywood Squares and all that stuff.
Nice.
So it was fun. And I did Oklahoma with Sandy Duncan there, and the production manager who was working on the show had left in the middle of it to go do Rent on tour with this production company that he was working for. And then, his name was Bobby Edgar, and we had gotten to be fast friends, but then he was like, well, I got to go do this other thing. It's going to be good for me. And I was like, okay, cool. and that was fine. But then, as I was still working at Civic and working my job, and I kind of felt like theater was really calling me back. And I would go on these websites, there's a couple of websites that have job postings and stuff like that. I was on backstagejobs.com. Which is actually offstagejobs.com now, but I saw a posting from a company looking for a sound guy to do the Oklahoma tour. And the contact's name was the same guy that was working at Cherry County Playhouse when I did Oklahoma there.
You're like, I know that guy.
I know that guy, and I know that show.
Yep.
And it felt right to me. It felt like, okay, if ever whether there was a time that the universe is speaking to me at that point, this has got to be it. So I called the guy and was like, hey, I think I'm ready to. I learned, I think, everything I could learn as far as like local sound and doing stuff, and I probably could have continued on that path and maybe worked at corporate sound, but I just felt like theater was always the thing that was like calling me back. And I loved mixing shows. And so I called the guy up and I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I was at Cherry County, and he was like, oh, I totally remember you. This would be a really great opportunity. I think this is good for you. I'm gonna go to bat for you, and we're gonna see what happens. And lo and behold, I got the job, and I show up to the first day of the shop, and sitting there is sound designer Brian Ronan, who is a Broadway sound designer. And so my first tour, I was literally working with guys who were doing Broadway, and this guy is treating me like I'm one of his guys, that it's like the same level of, and he's, we're asking questions, and I'm talking about line by line mixing, which we didn't really know. I didn't really know that term that back then, but I was talking about, how to mix a show, and he was like, absolutely, that's the way we mix a show. And then sort of building on that and building techniques, and then learning how to pack a show is crazy, because that's a whole nother ballpark, just trying to like tour a musical, especially one that is a one-nighter. So this was a one-nighter tour.
Yeah.
Bus and truck. So you think about it, we did 96 cities in 22 weeks.
Wait, time out. Do the math on that for me.
I know, right?
Tell me how that, you did what?
We did 96 cities in approximately 100 what's 22 times 7, I guess. 150 days.
Crazy.
So we had like a little break at the beginning. We would go out and do things, and we had a week sit near the beginning of the tour, and then you just literally go. And it was probably more shows than that, because we would do what's called a matinee load in.
Wow.
And you would go there and start loading in at like 4:00 in the morning instead of 8:00 in the morning, and try and get your show in before a 2:00 show, then do a 2:00 and 8:00, and then load it out. And I think you've had people on the show talk about like that day, that kind of that work day that on a one-nighter tour literally is a 16-hour day every day.
Yeah.
And
so when do you sleep?
Well, you sleep when you can. I mean, the thing about it is also that, you start at 8, you do the show, and then you load out, and it's probably maybe 2:00 in the morning, and you think, well, I got 6 hours, I can go to sleep. But that's 6 hours if you go to sleep at that moment. Like if you were to drop,
never happens.
You got to get on the bus. You got to wind. Your adrenaline's so pumped because of all the stuff you just did that day, and you're all telling your stories about what did or didn't happen, or how Because the thing about one-nighter tours like that is you're always adapting. On the bigger shows, they have their set, and the load-in might not be exactly the same, but it's almost always going to be the same show. We were literally like in theaters that were way too small. We were cutting, they were cutting parts of the deck out, and like we had to cut scenery pieces and little things like that. And you're always training new people to run the show, because obviously, there's 12 of us, and 12 people don't really put on a show. It's like 30. So you have local crews that come in and, and help you with the show, and you got to train those guys not just once a week, but every day. And some are better than others. So
I bet, absolutely.
So the little things that would happen, every day were just. Oklahoma had this great reveal during the overture where the scrim would go out, and the scrim would stay in, but the blackout would go out, and there would be this through the scrim reveal of a model of the farm of Aunt Eller's farm, and then the blackout would come back in, and they would strike the model and then put the full-size version of it on stage.
Nice.
And there's one time the little windmill was still on stage, and Curly comes in, and it was like Godzilla sort of moment where this Curly comes in from off stage as he's coming in, and there's this tiny little windmill, and he just kind of looked at it and just walked right on by it. There's nothing you could do. But just little moments like that where, and that would happen every day. Something would go wrong. It wasn't a perfect show ever.
It's theater, right? It's theater. It's every night. It's the magic.
Well, and especially when you move something like that much,
right?
You're trying to maintain it, and preventative maintenance becomes your friend, and knowing how the system goes together. That was the great thing about that tour, was that if you were to go out on a big show your first time out and you don't move it, but you only move it like every 3 months, like Frozen, I know, was doing 3-month sits, and Hamilton does 6 weeks and stuff like that, and sometimes longer. You start to forget like how it goes together and how the load in happens and stuff like that.
Yeah, when you're doing it, I did the math. It was almost every 1.5 days you were somewhere else.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah. So if you're moving it that much, you probably know a little better than you wish you did.
Yeah, you start to find a rhythm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah. Then I wish I did.
But there's definitely a rhythm you get into, I would imagine.
Yeah, and you learn, and it starts to become not only learn, but like it's second nature.
Right.
So then the next tour becomes a little easier, and you can kind of go on and on and on. So yeah. I was 5 days into that tour and I almost quit because it was so much. You're not sleeping for at that point we hadn't really slept for 5 days, because especially at the beginning, it's not 16 hours of work. It's really like 20, because you're still trying to figure out how it packs in the truck and still trying to figure out how it unloads and how you're doing stuff. And this is my first time out.
And was it a new tour, or did you come into an existing tour?
It was the third year of the Hugh Jackman version of Oklahoma.
Okay.
So it was that set and that look and all that stuff, but the companies try and squeeze as much as they can out of it, and I agree, trying to get into those smaller markets like Opelika, and I think I don't remember. I'm trying to think of somewhere in Oklahoma that we played, but it was just all these little tiny cities, Eugene, Oregon, and
right,
and Bakersfield, California, and San Luis Obispo, and things like towns that people don't know. But I know them all. We played
there you go.
North Dakota and Corpus Christi, Texas in the same week. So
wow, that's a trip.
Yeah, that's
a trip.
So it's crazy, and I think I got to that breaking point where I was like, and I was literally at the back of the bus being like, I don't know if I can do this, man. And it was my head carpenter, Andy Capps. He came back and he was like, "Is everything okay?" I was like, "I think I gotta go." Like, he's like, I don't think I can do it." He was like, "You're already doing it. What you've already learned it. There's no other thing to do. Just keep doing this."
Yeah, you've succeeded. I mean,
get some sleep.
The first day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we'll get sleep. That'll happen. It's just he's like, just don't quit.
And he obviously was a little more experienced at that point than you.
Yeah, I think he'd done 3 or 4 tours at that point.
Nice.
And it became sort of like a rite of passage, where I had survived, and it was that I had taken some union calls prior to my tour work with the local union here. And my union friends, when I first was considering getting the gig, I handed them the schedule and was like, "What do you guys think?" And they're like, "Oh my God, this is awful. You should do it."
Did anybody think, you sure they didn't reverse the numbers?
Yeah, exactly. But they were like, "You should absolutely do this." And I was like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, because if you get through this, when you get through this, everything else after that is going to feel like a vacation." And
get the worst out of the way now, because
never were there truer words spoken to me up until that point, because every tour now I've done, we'll go through them, the 8 tours. That was my first one, and they've all just been cake, like as far as like the traveling and the comparative to that, at least I can go, I'm not doing that anymore.
So the lesson, kids, is find the worst tour you can get to start out with. That's it.
It'll probably happen anyways. You don't even have to look.
Absolutely. Who was it we talked to? I think it was Renee Levine. Yeah. She started with a circus.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing. And she says the same thing. After that, everything was cake.
And it speaks to that, because you never think you're too good to do something, because
Absolutely.
you're always going to be learning, and just the amount of things I learned from that tour in the first week were more things than I've probably really learned, in the last couple tours. Really, you always improve upon, but like the base knowledge came from that thing,
Well,
and having a designer that's willing to trust you.
and which is huge, which is
Yeah,
especially being the new guy. I mean, that's
absolutely.
you got to give great respect to these folks that were there with you and patiently shepherded you along, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, being the new guy, I didn't have an assistant, so it was a lot of pressure on one guy.
Yeah.
Usually on these bigger tours, there's 2 or 3 sound guys, and then they'll have teams that come in for the load ins and load outs and stuff like that. So it
I think the other great piece of wisdom in, I mean, we halfway jokingly say get the worst thing you can up front, but maybe not, because here's the reality. Even though every show after that is better, every show after that is going to have a night that's exactly as like you went through every night, right?
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
so it prepares you. You've gone through all of those things, and so when they happen again, you're much better prepared to handle it.
And I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known better anyways. Like
Right, absolutely.
96 cities in 22 weeks, bring it on. Like you gave me that schedule now, I'd be like, no, I can't. Yeah, but at that point, I always felt like I was a little late in life, because that was 20. I think I was 25 at that point, because I left college at 21 and then took some time off. So this was 25, and so I was a little older ish than the other people on the tour, but it was still, the first time I had done anything like that. So to me, it just felt like the norm. Eventually, it just became, this is what we do. We have theater, lunch, theater, dinner, show, and it just becomes your life. So so I made it through that, and then the next thing that I Networks, that was the Networks presentations production. And they had called me at the end of the tour and kind of offered me a couple of options. And I was like, I don't know. I was kind of hem-hawing between the 2 shows they had offered me. And then Brian Ronan called me and said, what are you planning on doing? And I said, well, Networks has offered me the producers or Hairspray. And he was like, how easy would it be for you to get your union card? I would say I wouldn't necessarily have gotten my union card unless I had a reason to get it. And I was presented with that reason. So I went to the local 26 here in Grand Rapids and said, I've got a job that's ready. And they were very cool about it. I knew most of the guys anyway, because I had worked with them before. And
Right, yeah.
So they awarded me my union card, and I got 12 Angry Men tour, which was a play.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting, because you don't see a lot of plays tour. Most people think musicals, big thing, but Brian had wanted to do body mics on all the actors for the tour, because he had done a bunch of area miking for the Broadway production, but just the difference in room sizes and things like that would have been.
Yeah, that's tough to do when you're going from venue to venue.
Exactly, which was great. And so they were all on tie clips, and the things I learned from that were like how to mix dialogue, because music is a thing you can mix. Brian would always say it's easy to mix a song, which it isn't, but it is, because you know when everybody's going to come in. There's a timing involved to it. But with dialogue, book scenes, in musicals even, you just have no idea. They can say whatever they want whenever they want.
Right.
And eventually, professional theater, there's a rhythm to it, and it does sort of become the same show every night. But you got to be prepared and ready, because if that actor decides to be more in the moment or something like that, you've got to feel for it. And I always say that mixing a show is so much part of the performance, because you have to know everything about everyone.
Right, absolutely.
That person's not singing quite right. You have to know that maybe they're a little sick today, or they, or you got to help them out, or pull back because they got more confidence or something. And that mixing dialogue like that we did that show for 2 years. So that was awesome. Learning that and honing that craft and being able to put that in my pocket and go, look, now I have that. And so my book scenes don't suffer in a musical where I can mix the songs and all that stuff. But when you get to dialogue in a musical, I can mix that to my best abilities to match what I'm doing with the other stuff. And I toured with a guy, his name was Jer Schweitzer, and he had been touring for a long time, but he was an old road dog, and he taught me everything about union touring, how to read your contract, know your value, understand that if they're providing you a meal, it shouldn't be pizza all the time, things like that, where, fight for the rights and the humane things, because
Right.
a lot of companies out there will get away with just shoving pizza in your face every day.
Unless you're in Chicago, right?
Right. Well, the local delicacies are exceptions to the rule. If I'm in Oklahoma, then I'm going to want ribs.
There you go. Absolutely.
Barbecue. If I'm in Dallas, steaks would be nice. Things like that. So it was things like that where you have to understand what your self-worth is and not be afraid to apply that. And, that was great. So I toured with that for 2 years. And then, again, Brian calls at the end and says, what do you want to do? I got Spring Awakening. I'd really like you to do that. But I had heard that the Rent tour was going to go out, and it was going to go out big. At that point, Rent had been touring for almost 13 years, I think. And or it had been touring for 7. It was on Broadway for 13. And it was going to close. So that was the year Broadway closed Rent. I think it was 2008 or 2009. And I knew, I had read an article that said that they were going to bring back some of the original cast members. So it was like Anthony Rapp and Adam Pascal. And then
it's going to be big, absolutely.
Yeah, it's huge. And it was going to be union and all this stuff, because there's a lot of non-union touring happening at that time too. And so I knew this was, and Rent was probably the one. Rent had come out while we were in high school. And so we bought the CD and we're listening to it like nonstop. And I thought, I think out of all the shows that I had watched or listened to back then, Rent was probably the most influential to me.
Yeah.
Just being like, I can't believe this is what shows sound like. This is like full on rock and roll. It's all sung. There's no dialogue. It's like an opera. So it's like Les Mis, but rock and roll. And it was just so cool. And the story behind, Jonathan Larson and all this stuff just really touched all of us, on an emotional level. So I literally asked Brian if I could, because Brian had sound designed and mixed that tour as well. And I was like, I really want to do Rent. And he was like, really? I was like, yeah, it's really important to me. I know it might be not a wise move career choice because it's not moving up the ladder as much, but I really want to do Rent. And he was like, okay. So I ended up being the A2 on Rent, and Greg Bober was the A1. Great guy. I mean, I love Greg Bober's mixes. I've heard him mix a bunch of shows. He actually did Hairspray for a while, and he did Rent, and he's now on the Hamilton Advance crew. And he mixed the tour of Les Mis when it first went out, like the new version of it, but when it first left.
Yeah.
Now it's been out for a decade or something like that. But he was great, and I kind of like leaned into my A2 role because I really hadn't been an A2 at that point. I hadn't even had an assistant at that point because Oklahoma was by myself. 12 Angry Men was a small show, so I was by myself. And Rent, I was like, yeah, I really need to learn how to be an A2 so that when that happens to me, or like if I have an A2, I know.
You have a much better understanding. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's wise.
So I kind of leaned into that and just tried to make his life as easy as possible. And it was so cool because then as an A2, you still get to mix. Like he gave me 3 shows a week. So I was doing Thursday nights and matinees. And the first time I was out mixing the show, that was when I finally said, you know what? I've made it. I'm mixing a show that I listened to with the voices that I listened to when I was in high school. And this it doesn't get any better than this for me. And it was still probably to this day the funnest show I have ever mixed.
That's awesome.
There are moments in that show, and then there's little moments in the show that are awesome, but just the memories. And the original music director had come out to see the show, and he gave me some really great compliments about what I was doing, and just I was so proud of that show, and so good. Great to be a part of it, and that family.
25,600 minutes of it.
Man, it was and we did 2 years of it, so I think I ended up doing like 200 and some odd performances of it.
That's great,
which is crazy, and still to this day have friends that family. Once you enter the Rent family, you're like part of it all. So there's a Christmas email that goes around every year, and I'm getting emails from like Adina Menzel, not me personally, but like it's just like all emails, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is my life? Things like that. So then after that, I actually did get a chance to do Spring Awakening because they were going out for a second year, and I was the A1 on that. So I kind of got the best of both worlds there. Was able to do both. And Spring Awakening was fun, but it was another one-nighter. So
back to that.
While I thought, well, I'll never do that again when I left Oklahoma, after that would have been almost 5 years later, I thought I could do that again. That was really fun. It's like I always hear like when women have babies and there's like a chemical that gets released that makes them forget about the birth and how awful it was, so you have more babies. I felt like that was what happened to me. Like I just forgot all the bad things that happened as far as a one-nighter tour was concerned. It was
so how long did it take till they came rushing back?
Yeah. Oh,
like
man.
The first night? I remember.
Oh, man. And you're just going to all the little, the little tiny towns, college. And that was a big show for kids, like college-age kids. So we were going to all the college towns, and it was the second year of the tour because the first year had already gone out, so it was big. But I had an assistant, which was nice. So that was like learning how to deal with that and teaching somebody how to mix a show, learning how to do all that. And that was like it was a short. I think it was only like 4 or 5 months, so it was nothing. But I made it through. And then I did Peter Pan. So I got Peter Pan. Kathy Rigby was going to go out for one last farewell to do Peter Pan one more time, and I had grown up watching that movie. Yeah, with Kathy Rigby flying, and my mom had watched Mary Martin do it. And
that was the very first musical I ever saw as a child. I was very, very young, and I remember. In LA, I still remember to this day the big pirate ship coming out, and it was like in a coliseum, and motorized, remote control crocodiles.
Yeah,
that was the magic, right? It was. I bought into it. It was still remember it. So good.
Doc was actually a real person in it.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was like on one of those mechanic skateboard things and like rolling across the stage. But it was, and I think like at that point in my career, I think Peter Pan was the right move for me because I had started, I'd just done this one-nighter tour, and you start getting burned out a little bit by doing all this stuff. And being out I call it being on the island, right? Because you're mixing out, and you're in the audience. You and the light guy and maybe the spot op are like so disconnected from everything that's going on stage. But as a sound guy, again, you have to be connected to the action. But the great part was also being in the audience and looking at and watching the kids enjoy it. I mean, there was nothing that like filled my heart more than watching like the little 8-year-old girl dressed in her Peter Pan outfit, like wide-eyed and mouth open, watching Kathy Rigby fly.
Absolutely.
Because I see it as she's moving back and forth, 30 feet across the stage, going up and down like 5 or 6 feet on some wires, flipping around and stuff like that. But you kind of start living through that.
Right. The whole suspension of disbelief. It's
oh my gosh. And
for those kids.
It did me wonders, and it filled my heart so much to watch all that, and to be a part of that. And to be part of Kathy's farewell was really like an honor, to be honest. It was really nice. And I had a great time on the tour. Still, again, have friends lifelong friends from that tour, and it was a really good time. And again, it wasn't like a one nighter. We were doing mostly week sits and stuff like that. So it was nice. We went to Macau with that, so we got to go to China.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was very cool. And on Rent, I got to go to Japan and Korea, that was my first like international experience. That was very, very cool. So then after Peter Pan, I guess I kind of took a break. I came home where there wasn't really a show to be done. Like McCoy Rigby was the company that did Peter Pan, but they didn't have any other work. And I'd sort of like pulled out of networks a little bit, so they were trying to fill their positions with their people. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll just go home for a little while. And that's when I found my wife.
Nice.
Who had been kind of hanging out. I'd known her for like 15 years at that point. And but we started doing some shows together, and and working together, and just got together. So we got engaged, and then I needed to pay for the wedding. So I got a phone call from somebody, asked me if I wanted to do the Bridges of Madison County tour. And I was like, well, yeah, I need money for the wedding, so I'll do that. No problem. And so then I was like, that was hard. That was a great show because I also learned the value of like a string section. The score for that show, I don't know if you've ever heard Bridges.
Yes, absolutely.
There's no wind instruments in it.
Right.
It's all strings, guitars, a piano, and a percussion section. So it kind of like put my ears in a different place because you're so used to hearing trumpets and saxophones and things like that, and sort of concentrating on a string section. It was just amazing to learn like all the ins and outs of that and how those instruments go together. And it just, again, I try and learn something from every show that I can bring to my skill set. The other part of that was I was taking over for somebody because the first guy wasn't working out, so they got rid of him, and I had to come and take over somebody else's mix, which then becomes, slowly becomes your mix, and you have to kind of figure out the balance of what's there and what's good over, the what you want to do with the show.
Right.
And how to make it that way.
Yeah, because you probably don't want to change it suddenly, everything different, because the actor will freak out. Yeah,
exactly. And you want to respect, even though the guy wasn't working out, I think you want to respect the work that's been done to that point.
Right.
Not be a total jerk and just be like, stand back, I got this, sort of thing. It was an amalgamation of that, and then building it into something that I liked and had fun. I had great fun mixing that show. And the sound designer was John Weston. So he came out and kind of helped that first move because I was by myself and helped really figure it out. And the other thing the only issue I had with that tour was that it taught me the value of labeling everything, because the people who had worked on the show to that point, there really wasn't anything labeled. So they were kind of just guessing, and not really guessing, but they were kind of plugging stuff in and just being like, well, I'll just tell you what I plugged in on this end, and you can plug it in on that end. And I was like,
yeah, that doesn't work.
This one's always going to be this. It's going to be labeled that, and you're always going to plug it into this. Because troubleshooting is such an important aspect of a system that has 10,000 connections, and you're putting it together in 8 hours. You're going to miss one, or two. And if you don't have it labeled properly, and even if it gets mispatched or not patched at all, you need to be looking for open holes and then cross patching and stuff like that. You don't want it to take up that much time. So that was a good lesson in that. And my A2 on that show was Justin, and he was a learner, so that was good. He was able to learn a lot and get with the program. And then at the end of that, I did The King and I, and that was a great production of The King and I. It was that Lincoln Center production. We had the wedding, and then like the day after the wedding, my wife and I both left for The King and I because she ended up being a child wrangler on the show to take care of the 13-year-olds. Which
wow.
Was fun. Well, they ranged, but they all, even though there was one that was probably 7 and one that was a little older, they all kind of met in the middle and just became,
yeah,
They were all 13 at one point. So that was fun having her with me, and not having to sacrifice my relationship for a tour, and just being like, why don't you just come in, getting her that job and all that was nice. And having her there. And that was sort of a lesson in you don't necessarily know what show you're on until you're on it. Because I had sort of negotiated that when I took Bridges and then they offered me The King and I was like, yeah, I'll do The King and I if I can do Miss Saigon. And they were like, yeah, I think that might work. And then when we got to the point of Miss Saigon, there was other things that had come into play, and the sound designer wanted to pick somebody else, and I ended up not doing it. So there was like a couple of times there where we thought Miss Saigon, and then we thought Fiddler on the Roof, and then Hello Dolly came along, and Scott Lair was the sound designer from The King and I just kind of asked Scott if I could do it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's make that happen. And it's nice as a sound person, you have a couple of avenues to find work for, because you can ask the sound designer if they've got work, or you can ask the company you're working for if they've got work. And, hopefully they both like what you're doing and you have options instead of trying to scramble for work. And
yeah, options are always good.
Yeah. And then Hello Dolly was what we were on until COVID hit, and they cut the tour a couple weeks short, and now we're home, and
here you are
today.
Well, that's great, man. That's a big journey, but
yeah,
such a good one as always. We don't have a lot of time left, but there are a couple things that I want to dig into a little more.
Sure.
Just here to close some things out, but there were some big takeaways that are kind of commonalities throughout your journey, and I'm sure you know what those are. One of those really is the fact that you alluded to it even before you got into theater. You're a teacher. You're a teacher at heart. I mean, that's obvious. You, even from what we've heard from other people before that have talked about you and you teaching them, how important is that to the world of tech theater for people to be both a teacher and teachable?
I think it's insanely important. The biggest complaint I think I hear from the old road guys or the old technicians, the old stagehands, is that these kids don't know what they're doing these days. That sort of mentality really happens. And my response to that is, well, are you teaching them? Are you showing them what you do? Is that person pulling the rope the way you pull it? Or if they're not, then why aren't you saying to them in a teachable way, not, hey, you're doing that wrong. Like, hey, try this, and that's what furthers the craft. For me, I'm not going to be in this industry forever. Hopefully, a few more years or however long it takes. But I was fortunate enough to have people above me teaching me what I needed to know. And I just don't understand the process of, this is my thing, go away. If we're supposed to be working on this together, and I just always and it's always frustrating again when audience members come up to you at intermission and they're like I had a father and his 10-year-old son come up one time and be like, see, I told you it was all computers, because the soundboard kind of looks like a computer, and the light board kind of looks like a computer. And it rubs me in a way where I'm not mad about it, but I always wanted I always want to be informative. The thing I'll say to that is hey, well, just so you know, your car is a computer too, but you still have to drive it. Computer is assisting me, yes, but everything you're hearing, if I didn't do anything, you wouldn't hear anything. It's just the way it is.
Well, and the fact that every night it's different, the computer can't react to that.
Of course. As long as there's humans on stage, there will be humans at the soundboard. And that's just the way it is, because you have to be able to adapt to that. Or technology will, ascend beyond all of that stuff maybe one day. But I think we have to, and we have to, teach them well and let them lead the way, so to speak. And you have to have that mentality of passing on what you know. There are no secrets. There shouldn't, and there shouldn't be. There's no reason for me to keep any of this to myself, because it doesn't do anybody any good. And I might not know everything, but at least you can garner some sort of something out of what I'm blathering about.
No, it's all good, man. And then do you recommend to kids, people who are interested in pursuing this or knowing more, don't be afraid to ask. If you're at a show and you see a sound guy, sound
Absolutely.
technician.
I think the greatest thing that I've done, my proudest thing, not the greatest thing, my proudest thing is that if kids come over and want to ask questions, I stay there at intermission. I try not to just bolt away. Or if there's a problem I have to go fix, then I do it. But if there are kids that want to come and talk about what I'm doing, or parents or grandmas or whoever, my kids in theater, blah, 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 and I'll hand them my email. If they're old enough and they're answering the question or asking the right questions or even answering the right questions, my first instinct is, what are you doing tomorrow? Or what are you doing on Friday or something like that, where do you want to come back and shadow me? Because we're in a learning environment, and if you are interested in this, then I want to show you everything that happens. So at least at an early age, because again, I feel like I was a little behind the ball, and that's just me. But at an early age, you can decide whether or not you really want to do it, and it might bring you in more, or it might be something that you're like, well, that wasn't what I thought it was. But at least at a teen, a preteen or a teenager or whatever, you can decide and not have to wait and sort of self-discover it, at a slower pace. And then you can figure out what you want to do.
Absolutely. And not only that, but I really think too, maybe that kid becomes a performer,
Sure.
Right? They're going to appreciate a lot more what you're doing in the back of the house.
Absolutely.
And that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I will. There's an organization called soundgirls.org, and they're specializing in getting females into the sound industry. So
nice.
I kind of partnered with them at the end of Hello Dolly, and they were setting me up with people who would literally come to the show specifically to shadow and ask all their questions. That they would come with journals with questions written in them, and already know what they want to ask at that point. But even if you don't, like, if the guy's standing there looking like he's not doing anything or texting on his phone or something like that, if you stand there long enough, he's probably going to acknowledge you. If he doesn't, then whatever. But keep trying. Keep trying. Ask those guys, what they're doing, or, hey, I worked at my church, or hey, I do sound for my high school, or, even if you just want to say hello, it's nice to talk to those guys, and we're there to talk to. I am. I don't know anybody else's thoughts about it, but I feel it's important.
Yeah, I think you're right. You guys are the stars too. I mean, that's part of it. So, well, awesome. Well, two things here, and before we're done, one of those is, everybody who watches this knows it's my favorite. I just want to hear you put into words, why do you love doing what you do? What is it that fuels the fire of passion and really gets you excited about being a professional in the sound technician area for musical theater?
I think that for me, it's all about the emotional connection.
Okay.
People respond to music in a different way, but most of it is emotional based. If I can help 2,200 people, connect to the piece that they're watching, and then I feel emotionally connected to it as well. Like, I don't know, it just makes me feel good that I'm helping people get through their day or forget about their day, whatever it may be, and if they're able to hear it, then they'll be more included in it. And again, like you said, you never know who you're going to influence. That might bring somebody in. There might be a kid out there like me who was watching their first show, and if that first show would have been terrible, I might have decided that, or not even considered it.
Right. Absolutely.
So, I don't know. I feel like it's selfless in that manner, where I want everyone else to enjoy it even more than I do, I think. But I think that's why I love it so much, is because it's such a connection to people, and and people might not even understand that it's happening until it happens. You know, you're not going to go to a show thinking I'm gonna emotionally connect to this, blah blah blah. But when you sit there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, you know, and it moves you.
Right. Absolutely.
That's what I love about this industry, and I think being a part of that is what I love about doing it. You know, and people don't understand, you know, how important that can be to the human spirit.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the magic, right? I mean, you are helping. You're as important as that actor on the stage is at everything coming together at that moment in time, making the magic happen, and it's just almost inexplicable, and it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
But man, when it does.
But I try and always strive for, I call it the goosebumps moments. Like if I'm mixing a show and it's all going right, I will literally have a physical reaction to it. Like I get goosebumps and I'm like, oh, there it is. You know,
nice.
You know, and there's nothing can replace that. Like that's.
Well, and I got to imagine night after night, big venue, little venue, especially those, you know, where you're at a new place every day and a half, right? The bus tours. You've got to have that passion because you've seen the show 96 times, but that 96 performance is that audience member's first time to see it, and they deserve just as much as that first or second show.
Right. I mean, we did The King and I for 2 years. We did 648 performances.
Wow.
And that was sort of a shorter tour. You know, Wicked's been out for thousands, you know, and things like that where, and it's sometimes it's hard, but once you get there and you're in it, it's very easy to just become part of the show. You know, it might be hard to get there. Like you might be, you know, it's a job and you're dredging to work every day and you're like, man, the grass is always greener, you know, sort of thing. But once I'm there and behind the faders and mixing the show, there's nothing else in the world. That's what I want.
And that, sir, is why you are a star. It's true. It's absolutely true. All right, so we've gone a little over, but I didn't want to cut any of that out because it's all so good, dude. Yeah. It's all so good. Thank you for just dropping this. And now you got one opportunity here to drop one more bit of wisdom, the wisdom bomb that's going to live on the Gateway Mortgage Wall of Wisdom forever. And of course, until this trailer's gone or who knows. But you knew this was coming. You've seen the show before, I know. You're a fan. You're a fan of the show, right?
I'm a fan.
So, Tim Schmidt, what is your nugget of wisdom for the wall?
I like there are no secrets.
There are no secrets. I got my pen. I'm going to put it on the gaff. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
I say it a lot when I'm talking to people about, you know, and it's not even just students. Like I was in a church the other day helping them with stuff, and people are so appreciative on that level of any kind of help that you provide. And I'm like, of course, why would I'm not going to just come in and like mess with the soundboard and be like, there it is. I want you to know what I did so that you can do it on your own.
Well, not only that, but I think there's something to be said. I've never understood people who have spent their life honing a craft and then not honored themselves by passing that knowledge on.
That's exactly right.
That makes no sense to me.
That's exactly
right.
Yep.
All right. There it is. I did it. I think I even spelled everything right.
Yeah.
There are no secrets. Tim Schmidt. All right, dude. Well, we're going to put it up here. We're about to fill it up. We're going to have to get a bigger wall.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. And we've got much more to come as well. It's so exciting. But Tim, as always, I'm never disappointed. Our guests, you guys, you hidden stars, and hopefully this show is going to make it so you're not hidden. Hopefully when people watch this, the next show they go to, they're going to listen. If you're watching this, the next show you go to, seek out those hidden stars, find them, see who they are, thank them, meet them, know them. They're great people. They're just as important as that leading actor or that chorus member up on the stage. They're making the magic happen for you. And And as you've heard, it's a sacrifice in a lot of ways. So we appreciate you. And as always, you don't get to do a curtain call, so I am representing the world. This is for you and everybody that watches. I'm sure they'll stop and they'll clap at this time as well. So if you were listening, stop and clap. So this, sir, is your curtain call. Thank you, Tim. It should be much longer than that because it's well deserved.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, and it's been so great to get to know you and hear your story and so much wisdom there, and look forward to keeping these relationships going as well. But just thank you for taking the time out of your day and your life to spend with us.
It's important to me. I like you said, I am a teacher, and I like passing on the knowledge, and so I thank you for giving us an opportunity to have that.
Well, it's really my privilege, Tim, to get to do that. I tell you what, I feel like this is just the greatest thing in the world, to get to be the person who helps tell your story, and because it's such a great story and everybody needs to hear it. And so, the fact that I get to sit here and talk to you is just an honor and a privilege. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you guys, as always. We wouldn't be doing this without you either. And so all of you out there, hey, I want to know where you're from. I want to know, what's your theater involvement? What do you do? So my email address is down below. Fill that inbox up. Let me know where you're viewing from. Let me know if you're in a show. Let me know if you're tech. Let me know if you act, what you love to do. I just want to get to know you guys. Send pictures if we can put them on the show. If they're, if you've done a show recently and you want to show that off, we'd love to show you off. Speaking of that, again, thank you, our feature school, Tammy Mamet from Dowagiac High School there in Dowagiac, Michigan. Man, you guys are awesome. Subscribe, like, comment right here. That's important. We need that. And not only that, but tell everybody else. You got friends out there that you haven't told about the show. Be honest. Share. Sharing is good, right? Let's be nice. Let's share. So anyway, we'll see you next time right here on the Hidden Stars of Theater.